My wife told the court I had been absent for our entire marriage. She didn't know I had spent 9 years writing down every school pickup, every doctor's visit, every bedtime story. My father left when I was 7 years old, not dramatically, not with a fight or a scene or the kind of departure that announces itself as significant. He left in the way that some men leave gradually, incrementally, through a series of absences that each had a reasonable explanation until the absences were the pattern and the explanation was irrelevant. A work trip that extended, a visit to a brother in Cleveland that became an indefinite stay, phone calls that came less frequently and then stopped being returned and then stopped coming at all. By the time I was 9, I understood that my father was not coming home. By the time I was 12, I had stopped expecting it. By the time I was 15, I had built the specific functional detachment from the fact of his absence that allows a person to continue operating without the thing they needed. He reappeared at intervals. Thanksgiving of the year, I was 16 with a woman I had never met, and a jacket that was too nice for the occasion, and the specific quality of warmth that men who have been absent deploy when they return the warmth of someone performing the role, rather than inhabiting it warm in all the external gestures and hollow in the specific ways that the people who needed the real thing could always identify. Christmas, when I was 19, during which he gave me $100 in an envelope and said I was a man now, and he was proud of how I had turned out. My college graduation, briefly long enough to take a photograph that I have never displayed anywhere. I am not telling you this to explain myself. I am telling you this because it is the context for everything that follows, for the specific reason that my own story cannot be understood without it. My father's absence was not the worst thing that could have happened to a child. It was the thing that happened to me, and it shaped me in ways that are specific and real, and that I have spent 34 years understanding. The most significant way it shaped me was this. It gave me a clear picture from a very early age of what a father was not. And the negative space of that picture became the template for what I was determined to be. My name is Nathan Cole. I am 41 years old. I grew up in the South Side of Chicago, the oldest of 3 children of a woman named Lorraine, who worked as a hospital administrator for 31 years and who raised us with the specific combination of discipline and love and practicality that is the signature of a parent doing the work of 2. I learned HVAC from a trade program at Richard J. Daley College, worked under a licensed contractor for 4 years, got my own license at 26, built a business called Cole HVAC and Construction that now has 8 employees and a reputation in the Pilsen and Bridgeport neighborhoods that I am genuinely proud of. I married Vanessa Williams in June 2010. She was the smartest person I had ever met, and the most driven, and the most beautiful in the specific way of someone who is beautiful without being interested in it, whose appearance is just one of the things they are, rather than the primary thing. We were married for 13 years before she filed for divorce. We had 1 child, a son Marcus born in April 2015. From the night Marcus was born, I kept a journal. Part 2. The journals. I want to explain what the journals were, before I explain why I kept them, because the what clarifies the why in a way that the why alone does not fully capture. They were not diaries in the emotional sense. They did not contain reflections on my feelings or analyses of my relationships, or the kind of interior processing that the word journal typically implies. They were records, logs. The specific factual documentation of days, not all of the day, just the parts that mattered for the purpose I was keeping them for. Each entry was short, sometimes a single sentence, rarely more than a paragraph. The format was consistent date, then a factual account of the day's activities as they related to Marcus. Here is an entry from October of Marcus's first year, chosen at random, from the first notebook, October 14th, 2015. Marcus had a bad night, up 3 times. Vanessa had an early call, so I handled the midnight and the 3 a.m. feedings. He settled better with the swaddle. Took him to the park at 10 a.m. first time in the stroller. He slept the whole way. Back by noon. Here is one from 2 years later, March 7th, 2017. Marcus started saying no to everything today and seemed genuinely pleased about this. Vanessa, at a conference in New York, picked him up from daycare at 5:30, made pasta, which he ate exactly 4 bites of, and then announced he was done. Bath. 2 books asleep by 8:15. He asked where Mama was, and I said she was working, and he said, "Oh," and went back to his book. Here is one from the year he started school, September 4th, 2019. First day of kindergarten. Marcus wore the blue backpack he picked himself. He held my hand until we got to the classroom door, and then he let go without me asking him to, which felt like something. Vanessa got there late traffic. She texted made it just before the bell. Marcus saw her and waved. His teacher is Mrs. Okafor. She seems good. Stayed until they went inside. 12 notebooks, 9 years, 3,287 entries. I kept them because of my father, not out of anger at my father or as a form of redress for what his absence had done to me, or as a deliberate act of differentiation from the man he had been. I kept them because I had at some point in my late 20s, when I was thinking about what kind of father I wanted to be, arrived at an understanding about his absence that I had not had when I was inside it. What his absence had cost me most was not the material provision or even the practical support, though those things were real. What it had cost me most was the absence of evidence. There was no record of the time he had not spent. There was no documentation of the decisions not made, the conversations not had the ordinary unremarkable accumulation of days that constitute a childhood and that require a present parent to produce. When he told the story of his fatherhood, which he did in the encounters I had with him as an adult, in the way of a man who has simplified a complicated history into a more comfortable narrative, there was nothing in the record to contradict it. The absence left no paper trail. The not being there generates no documentation. I decided before Marcus was born that I was going to be there. And I decided that I was going to have the record of it, not because I expected to need it, not because I anticipated a dispute, but because I wanted Marcus to have it. Because if he ever at some point in his life wanted to know whether his father had been present, I wanted him to be able to look it up. I wanted it to be a matter of record, rather than a matter of memory, which can be argued with, which can be revised, which can be told differently by different people with different interests in the telling. I bought the first notebook at Walgreens the day we brought Marcus home from the hospital. I wrote the first entry, sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery at 2 a.m, while Marcus slept on my chest because Vanessa needed to sleep, and I was awake anyway, and the first entry was simply this: April 17th, 2015. Marcus Raymond Cole. 6 pounds, 14 ounces. He has Vanessa's nose and what looks like might be my ears. He has been breathing for 11 hours. I am his father. 9 years later, those 12 notebooks would be presented as evidence in a custody proceeding in Cook County Family Court. I had not written a single word of them for that purpose. Part 3. Vanessa. I want to tell you about Vanessa accurately, which means I want to resist 2 versions of her that are both insufficient. The first insufficient version is the one that becomes available when someone has wronged you, the retrospective villain, the person who was always what they became, whose flaws you should have seen, and whose good qualities were either performances or irrelevant in the face of what they eventually did. This version is emotionally coherent and factually dishonest, and I am not going to give it to you. The second insufficient version is the one that becomes available when you love someone and want to preserve the love even after it has become untenable. The sanitized account, the performance of generosity that papers over the real thing with something that looks like wisdom but is actually avoidance. I am not going to give you that version either. What I am going to give you is as accurate an account as I can manage of who Vanessa was and who she became, and where those two things diverged, because I think the divergence is the most honest thing I can tell you about what happened to our marriage. Vanessa Williams. When I met her in 2007, was 23 years old and working her second job out of college, junior account manager at a marketing agency downtown, with the specific quality of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has already calculated the route. She was brilliant at her work, in the way that some people are brilliant at theirs, not because they have exceptional natural gifts, but because they apply themselves with a completeness that most people reserve for things they consider essential. She considered her work essential. She approached it accordingly. She was funny, in a dry, unexpected way, that you only discovered if you were paying attention, and she had the specific quality of being entirely uninterested in performing for people she did not respect, which meant that the warmth she showed you when she showed it was genuinely earned and therefore more valuable than the warmth of someone who distributed it freely. She showed it to me. I believed in it completely, and I was right to it was real. We built a life together over 3 years before we were married, and then we were married for 13 years, and the early years of the marriage were what I understood a good marriage to be. Two people who respected each other's work and wanted the same things for their future and had the specific daily affection for each other that comes from genuinely liking the person you have chosen, which is different from loving them, and which I think is in the long run as important. Marcus arrived, and Vanessa was the mother I had expected her to be fully present. When she was present, decisive, when decisions were needed, loving in a way that was real and that Marcus could feel. She was also the professional she had always been, rising through the agency, taking on larger clients, making herself important to the firm's revenue in a way that produced the career advancement she had always been working toward. She was for several years, doing both things at once, and doing them well, and I was proud of her for it. I want to be specific about when things changed because I think the specificity matters. I noticed it first in 2021. Not dramatically, in the way that you notice when the texture of something you have touched many times changes not enough to name immediately enough to register and store. The conversations over dinner that had always moved between our days and Marcus and the world became conversations about her work, which was fine, which was natural, but which shifted in quality from sharing to reporting, from mutual interest to a performance of update. The Sunday mornings that had been hours long slow, the particular unhurried quality of two people who have nowhere to be, began to have the quality of time being managed rather than time being had. I attributed it to the pandemic adjustment. I attributed it to the intensity of her work, which was genuinely intense in those years. I attributed it in the specific way that I attribute things I do not want to examine too directly to the ordinary friction of a marriage navigating a difficult period. In 2022, Vanessa began working with a new client. His name, as I would eventually learn, was Derek Walsh. Part 4. The morning everything changed. It was a Thursday morning in September 2023. Vanessa had an early meeting, the kind she had been having with increasing frequency over the preceding year, meetings that required her to leave before Marcus was up, that she managed with the specific efficiency of someone who had arranged her life to minimize friction. I was making lunches in the kitchen when she came through, already in her work clothes, phone in her hand, looking for her charger. "Mine died," she said, setting the phone on the counter. "Can you charge it? I'll get it tonight." "Sure," I said. She kissed Marcus on the top of the head. He was at the table with his cereal, half asleep in the way of 9-year-olds who have not yet fully inhabited their mornings, and she left. I picked up her phone to plug in the charger. The screen was cracked, had been cracked for 3 weeks. She kept meaning to get it fixed, and the notification previews were visible on the lock screen in the way that they are visible on phones, with cracked screens slightly larger than they should be, the text slightly easier to read than the settings were supposed to permit. A notification from a name I did not recognize. I read it. I am not going to tell you what it said, because the content is not the point, and it is not mine to share publicly. I will tell you that it was sufficient. that it required no interpretation, that it was the kind of message that communicates what it communicates in the first sentence and leaves no room for the alternative reading that you would very much like to be available. I looked at the notification for perhaps 4 seconds. Then, I plugged in the charger and set the phone face down on the counter. I went back to making lunches. I cut Marcus's sandwich into the triangles he preferred. I put the apple slices in the separate compartment so they wouldn't get soggy. I wrote a small note on the paper bag, the way I did every school day. Something brief, something specific to that day, something only the two of us would understand. I put the lunch bag by his backpack. I helped Marcus find his left shoe, which was under the couch in the living room, where it had ended up the previous evening despite the shoe rack being 6 feet from the front door. I tied it for him because he was still working on making the loops tight enough. I walked him to the corner where his friend Damon's mom picked them up on Thursdays. I watched him get into the car. I came back inside. I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes. Then, I went to work because the Morales family on 26th Street was waiting for a new furnace installation that was already delayed 2 days because of a parts issue, and the crew needed direction. And whatever was happening in my marriage was not a reason to leave 8 people without heat in September in Chicago when the temperature was already dropping at night. I went to work. 2 weeks later, on a Friday evening when Marcus was at a sleepover at Damon's house, Vanessa sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me she wanted a divorce. She was careful and honest in the way she told it, which I respected even then. She said the marriage had not been working for a long time and that she had tried to find her way back to it and had not been able to. She said she loved me as a person and as Marcus's father, and that she was sorry for the pain this was going to cause. She did not mention Derek Walsh. I did not mention the notification. I said I understood. I said I would do whatever was best for Marcus. I said we should take a few days before we talked about the specifics. 3 days later, I called my brother Ray, and then I called a lawyer. End of Act 1. Act 2. Escalating Conflict. Parts 5 to 9. 7. 200 words. Runtime, 45 minutes. Part 5. Scott Harrington's Strategy. The first time I heard Scott Harrington speak in a professional context was in a conference room at his firm on LaSalle Street, 6 weeks after Vanessa filed her petition. He was the kind of lawyer who had been doing this work for long enough that the work had become fully integrated into his personality, not distinguishable from it, which I noted because I had worked alongside enough contractors in my career to know what it looked like when someone's trade had consumed their self. His trade was family law, and specifically the subdivision of family law that concerned itself with custody disputes, and he had the specific quality of someone who had identified the most effective instrument for the work and had refined its use over years of repetition. The instrument was narrative, specifically the narrative of the absent father, the provider who thought providing was the same as parenting, the man whose name was on the mortgage and whose face appeared at the significant occasions, and who could not, if pressed, tell you the name of his child's teacher, or the specific fear that kept the child up at night, or the joke that was funny between them and nobody else. This narrative existed because it was real, because there were men exactly like this, because the pattern was common and well documented, and carried the weight of its genuine prevalence. Harrington was going to apply it to me. I understood this in the first 20 minutes of watching him work, and I understood it with the specific clarity of someone who had grown up watching the original. My father, who had been exactly that man, and whose absence had been so complete and so consistent that the pattern Harrington was about to deploy was one I had been studying as a negative space, as a warning, as the template for what I was not going to be for 30 years. The specific elements Harrington was building his case on were these. Nathan Cole works long hours, his business records subpoenaed, showed irregular schedules and frequent early departures during Marcus's early years. This was true. HVAC work does not observe school schedules. Nathan Cole was not actively involved in the PTA or other school community organizations in the way Vanessa was. Also true. Vanessa was on the PTA board. I was a member who attended meetings when I could. Nathan Cole's presence at school events was not consistently documented in the public record, meaning in the photographs and social media posts and official school communications that represented the official account of parental involvement. True. I do not photograph things for social media. I do not document my presence at things for an audience. Each of these points was accurate. Each of them was selected for its usefulness to a narrative and stripped of the context that would have made the picture accurate rather than convenient. This is not lying. It is the specific technique of building a case, and Harrington was good at it. He had also, in the discovery materials he produced, provided documentation of Vanessa's involvement in Marcus's life that was genuinely impressive. PTA records school, newsletters with her name in them, photographs of her at every significant school event, going back to kindergarten, her name on Marcus's emergency contact form as the primary contact. The primary contact. I had been the primary contact for Marcus's pediatrician for 9 years, but the school form had been filled out in 2019 by Vanessa while I was on a job in Peoria, and she had put her name first in the way that the person who fills out the form tends to put their name first, and no one had ever changed it. The emergency contact form was the piece of paper that existed. The actual pattern of who managed the emergencies was not a piece of paper. It was 12 notebooks and 3,200 entries that nobody had asked about yet. Part 6. Diane Foster. Ray gave me her name. Ray was 45 and lived in Hyde Park and had been a union electrician for 20 years and had the specific grounded quality of someone who had spent his life working with his hands and had developed through that work a clarity about what things were and were not that I found consistently useful. He had watched our father leave and had processed it differently than I had, more quietly, less with the formal resolution I had made, more with the practical adjustment that said that man is not coming back. These are the conditions, now figure out what you need to do. He had a friend whose cousin had used Diane Foster in a divorce that had been significantly more complicated than mine, and that had been resolved in a way the friend described as fair, which given the circumstances was more than we expected. Diane Foster's office was in Bronzeville, a 2-story building on 47th Street that had the quality of a professional space that had been there for a long time and was not trying to impress you, which I took as a positive sign. Her office was organized with the specific density of someone who handles a high volume of material and has developed systems to manage it. She had been doing family law for 28 years. She was 55 years old, and she had the quality I have come to associate with people who have been doing serious consequential work for a very long time, a kind of calm that was not detachment, but something more like depth. The depth of someone for whom the work has become so familiar that what registers as crisis to the person in front of them registers to her as a problem that has a shape. And problems that have a shape can be addressed. She read everything I brought her in 90 minutes. Then she looked up. "Tell me about the journals," she said. I had mentioned them briefly in my initial summary. She had flagged them with a note that said simply, "More." I told her what they were: the format, the content, the consistency. I told her about the 12 notebooks and the approximate number of entries and the date range. "You've been doing this since Marcus was born," she said. "Since the night we brought him home," I said. She looked at me for a moment with the specific quality of attention that lawyers give to things they are assessing for relevance. "Why?" she said. I told her about my father. She was quiet for a moment after I finished, not the quiet of someone who doesn't know what to say, the quiet of someone who is deciding what to say first, out of several things that are all true. "How many notebooks?" she said. 12, I said. "Entries? Do you have an estimate?" "Over 3,000, I said. "I've never counted exactly." A longer quiet. Then, "Nathan, I need you to go home tonight and count the exact number of entries in each notebook. Write it down. Bring it to me next week." She picked up her pen. and I need you to call Marcus's pediatrician's office tomorrow morning and request a copy of his full medical record, including documentation of who accompanied him to appointments. 9 years of records." "Okay," I said. "And the school. Contact the principal's office directly, not the front desk, and ask for records of school event attendance over the past 8 years. Frame it as a request for your own records. They'll be more forthcoming if you ask as a parent rather than as a litigant." I wrote down everything she said. "One more thing," she said. "The journals, are they handwritten? Every entry?" I said. She looked at me again with that assessing quality. "That's important," she said. "Typed records can be backdated. Handwritten records in dated notebooks are considerably harder to fabricate. The paper, the ink, aging, the consistency of the handwriting across years, these are things that can be analyzed if challenged." She paused. "I don't expect them to challenge the authenticity. I expect them to challenge the relevance, but I want you to know why the medium matters." I went home that night. I counted 3,287 entries. I brought the number to Diane the following week. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, in the tone of someone noting something they expected and are confirming rather than discovering, "Good." Part 7. The character reference. The discovery materials from Harrington's office arrived in a bundle 6 weeks into the proceedings, and I went through them the way I go through everything, methodically, page by page, looking for what was there and what it meant. Most of it was expected. Tax records establishing income differential. Calendar extracts from Vanessa's phone showing her school event attendance. A declaration from a woman named Carol Pittman, who had been on the PTA with Vanessa and who described Vanessa as consistently present and deeply engaged in Marcus's school community. And then a document labeled Character Reference Derek Walsh. I read the name first, then I read the document. It was 4 paragraphs. It described Nathan Cole as emotionally distant and chronically unavailable, someone who struggled to be present even when physically in the room. It described the child Marcus as primarily bonded with his mother, who has been his consistent emotional anchor. It described Vanessa as one of the most devoted mothers I have observed, someone who has sacrificed significantly to prioritize her child's well-being. The letter was signed, Derek Walsh, friend of the family. I read the name again. Derek Walsh was the name on the notification I had read on Vanessa's phone on the Thursday morning in September. I had not looked him up. I had not tried to find out anything more about him than I already knew from 2 accidental seconds of exposure. But his name was specific enough, and the context of the notification specific enough that I was certain I was reading correctly. Vanessa's boyfriend was writing a character reference describing me as an absent father. I sat with this for a long time. The quality of what I was feeling was not anger, though anger was somewhere in it. It was something more like the specific cold recognition of a shape, the recognition that this document, this letter, this 4 paragraphs of description by someone who had never spent a day in my house or watched me make lunch or waited in a pediatrician's office with a sick child on my lap, this was the instrument that had been prepared for this specific purpose. Not for the court to understand who I was. For the court to have a document on the record that said something specific, signed by a name in the way that signed documents on the record have weight regardless of what the person knows or doesn't know. I photographed the letter and sent it to Diane. She called me 30 minutes later. "Tell me what you know about Derek Walsh," she said. I told her about the notification. I told her that I had read it, understood it, and had not pursued it further. "Why not?" she said. "Because Marcus loves his mother." I said, "Whatever happened between Vanessa and me, it doesn't change that. And I didn't want to be the person who went through my wife's phone looking for ammunition." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a morally coherent position," she said carefully. "I want to make sure you've thought through what it costs you practically." "I have," I said. "There may be a point," she said, "where allowing this letter to stand unchallenged costs Marcus more than addressing it directly. I'm not asking you to make that decision today. I'm asking you to hold it open. I'm holding it open, I said. Part 8. What Nathan found and didn't use yet. Ray came to my apartment on a Sunday in November, the apartment I had rented in Bridgeport after moving out of the house. 2 bedrooms, because Marcus was there half the time, under the temporary arrangement, and I needed his room to be his room, not a guest room. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and I told him everything. Not the summary, the actual story with the specific details that I had not been telling people, because the specific details were painful in ways that were not useful to share with most people, but that Ray was the right person to hear. He listened the way Ray listened fully, without performing the listening in the specific way of our mother, who had the quality of giving you her complete attention without making you feel the weight of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. The journals, he said. Yes, I said. You've been keeping them for 9 years. Since the night he was born. He looked at his coffee. You told me about them when Marcus was a baby. I didn't know you were still doing it. Every night, I said. If I'm in the house, I write before I sleep. If I'm traveling, I write in the hotel room. If something happens that I need to capture, I write it down that day. Because of Dad, Ray said. It was not a question. Because of Dad, I confirmed. He nodded slowly in the way of someone processing something they understand, but are taking a moment to fully receive. You know what I think about that, he said. Tell me anyway. I think, he said, that Dad left us a specific kind of problem to solve. You solved it one way, you documented, you were present, you built a record. I solved it another way. I just decided that whatever I did, I would at least be honest about it. He paused. We both got the same problem from the same source, and we solved it differently, and both solutions are real. What's your point? My point is that the journals are not just evidence for a court case, he said. They are who you are. They are the answer to the question Dad left you with. And Vanessa's lawyer wants to stand up in front of a judge and say they're not. I sat with that. Diane wants me to reconsider the thing with Derek Walsh, I said. Ray looked at me carefully. What's the thing with Derek Walsh? I told him about the screenshots, that I could access them, that Diane believed they would be relevant, that I had been declining because of Marcus. He thought about it. What specifically does Diane want to use? She says she doesn't need the affair itself, just the material interest that the person writing the character reference is Vanessa's boyfriend, which means he has a direct stake in the outcome of the proceedings. That's the relevant part. And what does the rest of it contain? I told him about the message, the specific message. Nathan is a great dad. That's the hardest part. Ray repeated slowly. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a long time. Nathan, he said finally, I want you to think about something, not from the perspective of the case, from the perspective of Marcus. I'm always thinking from that perspective, I said. I know. So hear me. If the case goes the way Harrington is building it, Marcus grows up with a father who let himself be described as absent without correcting the record. He grows up with an official document in a court file that says his father was emotionally unavailable and chronically absent. And he can't find the journals because you didn't use them fully. Ray paused. Which version of the record is better for Marcus? I didn't answer immediately. He wasn't asking me to answer immediately. I'll think about it, I said. Part 9. The Isolation Campaign. I want to describe this period, the months between the filing and the first hearing, with the accuracy it deserves, which means describing not just the legal proceedings, but the ambient atmosphere of a life that is being disputed. When a marriage ends, especially when it ends contentiously, the social world that had been shared becomes a territory that is divided, renegotiated, or lost, sometimes all three. I had been watching this happen to friends over the years, had observed the specific social mechanics of it without ever expecting to navigate them myself, and found when I was inside it that observation had prepared me for the general shape of it, but not for the specific texture. The texture was this: people became careful, not hostile careful. They applied the specific careful quality that people apply to situations where they have received one person's account of events and have not yet received the others, and are uncertain which way the truth lies, and in the uncertainty, default to a kind of managed neutrality that functions in practice as a tilt toward the person whose account they heard first. Vanessa had been telling her account for longer than I had been in a position to tell mine. The PTA email list, which I had been on for 3 years, sent a monthly newsletter in October that did not include me, and when I called the school office to ask about it, I was told I would need to re-register. I re-registered. I did not make an issue of the gap. A couple we had been close to for years, the Hendersons, who lived 4 blocks away and whose son was in Marcus's class, sent a text in November that said they were thinking of me and hoping things were okay, in the tone of people who have been told something that makes them feel they should reach out, but who are not sure what they're reaching out toward. I thanked them. I did not ask what they had been told. A parent at Marcus's school, a woman named Donna, whose son played on the same soccer team, called me one Saturday morning, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming tournament schedule, and spent 20 minutes of the call doing something that I eventually identified as a welfare check, combined with information gathering a conversation designed to find out how I was doing and what I was saying while appearing to be about soccer. I told her Marcus was doing well, which was true, and that I was managing, which was also true, and ended the call as gently as I could. I noted all of this, not because I was keeping score, not because I intended to use it, but because noting things was how I processed the world had always been. How I processed, it was the habit that my father's absence had installed in me, and that had become so fully integrated into my way of being in the world that it no longer required conscious decision. I bought a new notebook. I labeled it Separation Observations. I wrote in it with the same quality of attention and the same factual register that I had always brought to the other notebooks. In the back of this notebook, because I was a man who had spent years keeping records and understood what was in them, I noted the Derek Walsh message. Not the content, the date I had read it, the circumstances, the specific phrase I remembered. Nathan is a great dad, that's the hardest part. I looked at that sentence for a long time. Then, I called Diane. End of Act 2. Act T3. The Twist and Reversal. Parts 10 to 13. 6,000 words. Runtime, 38 minutes. Part 10. 9 years. 3. 287 entries. The first hearing was in January. The Cook County Family Court Courthouse on Richard J. Daley Plaza has the specific quality of institutional spaces that have processed enormous amounts of human difficulty over many decades, worn functional, neither harsh nor welcoming, simply the container for what happens inside it. I had been in courtrooms before, for business disputes and permit hearings, and had the working man's relationship to legal proceedings, respect for the process, no romance about it. Judge Patricia Morales had been on the family law bench for 11 years, and had, as Diane described her in the preparatory session, a very low tolerance for performance and a very high tolerance for evidence. She is not interested in being convinced of things by rhetoric. She is interested in being shown things by documents. Harrington went first. His opening was well constructed. I want to give it that because I am trying to give you an accurate account rather than a flattering one. He described a marriage in which one partner had been present and one had not, in which the responsibilities of parenting had been distributed asymmetrically, in which the record of involvement showed a pattern of primary caretaking by the mother and peripheral involvement by the father. He used words like provider role and emotional availability and consistent presence in a sequence that built the picture he wanted the court to have. He referenced the documents he had produced, the PTA records, the school event, photographs, the emergency contact designation, the work records showing Nathan's hours. He described Vanessa as Marcus's primary caregiver across the entirety of Marcus's 9 years. He was not lying. He was presenting a selection of the available facts in the order and register most useful to his argument, which is what lawyers do and what I had expected him to do. Then, Diane stood up. Diane's opening was shorter. She did not describe my character, my commitment, or my love for my son. She said that Nathan Cole had maintained a contemporaneous record of his daily involvement in Marcus's life since the day Marcus was born, that this record comprised 3,287 individual entries across 12 notebooks spanning 9 years, that the record had been maintained in handwritten form throughout its entirety, and that she intended to introduce it as documentary evidence of the pattern of parenting that had actually occurred in the Cole household. She said, "The record speaks for itself." Judge Morales looked at the notebooks I had brought, all 12 stacked in order, in a canvas bag that I had carried into the courthouse, with the same quality of care with which I carry my work tools, because they were tools, because they were how I had built something, and she said she would like to examine a sample of the entries to be selected by a process she would describe. She said she would select entry numbers at random. I would read each entry aloud. Harrington could object if he found grounds to, and she would rule on the objections. She selected 12 entries, 3 from each of 4 periods: Marcus's early years, his kindergarten years, his early elementary years, and the most recent year. I read them aloud. I had not rehearsed this. I read them in the same tone I might read a work order or a materials list, factual, specific, without affect, because that was both the nature of the entries and the appropriate register for reading them in a courtroom. The first early years entry, a 2 a.m. feeding, November 2015. 8 months after Marcus was born. Vanessa with the migraine, Nathan awake with the baby, noting the specific time Marcus settled and the song he had sung, because he had run out of things to say and needed to make sounds. The second, a March 2017 entry about a late-night fever, 104 degrees, Vanessa, in New York for a conference. Nathan monitoring through the night, calling the pediatric advice line at 3 a.m., writing down the nurse's instructions verbatim in the margin of the entry. A 2019 entry about the first day of kindergarten. The specific detail of Marcus letting go of Nathan's hand at the classroom door without being asked, and Nathan waiting until Marcus had fully entered the room before turning to leave. A 2021 entry about a soccer game Marcus had played poorly in and had cried about afterward, and the 20 minutes they had spent in the car before going in, and what Marcus had said and what Nathan had said back, written with the specific quality of someone who understood that the 20 minutes in the car were the point, not the game. A 2022 entry about a school project on family history and the afternoon Marcus and Nathan had spent going through old photographs, and Nathan had told Marcus about his grandfather and what he knew and didn't know of him, and Marcus had asked, "Were you sad when he left?" And Nathan had written, "I told him yes, and I told him that was why I always tried to be here." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I know you're here." Dad, that is the most important thing anyone has ever said to me. The courtroom was very quiet. Harrington did not object to any of the entries. Judge Morales read 3 additional entries herself, chosen from different notebooks than the ones I had read. She read them with the focused attention of someone absorbing information, not performing absorption. When she finished, she set the notebook down. She looked at me. She said nothing. She made a note on her pad. Part 11. Principal Webb and Dr. Torres. The witness testimony was scheduled for the second day. Principal Sandra Webb had been at Marcus's school for 16 years, the last 8 as principal. She was in her late 50s, with the specific quality of someone who had spent decades in proximity to children and had developed from that proximity a finely calibrated ability to identify what was real and what was performed in the adults around them. She had agreed to testify, not for me specifically, she had told Diane in the preliminary call, but because she had records and the records were what they were. Diane's examination was brief. Over 8 years of Marcus's attendance at the school, What was the record of parental attendance at school events, meetings, and activities? Principal Webb had prepared a document. She referred to it. Nathan Cole had been present at 94% of recorded school events, parent-teacher conferences, class performances, field trip supervision, curriculum nights across 8 academic years. The total number of events in the record was 112. Nathan Cole appeared in the attendance documentation for 105 of them. Vanessa Cole's attendance record across the same 8 years, 67%. 75 of 112. Harrington cross-examined. He asked whether the attendance documentation captured all parental attendance or only documented attendance. All documented attendance, Principal Webb said. Is it possible that there were events where Vanessa Cole was present, but her attendance was not documented? It's possible for any event, Principal Webb said. It's possible for Nathan Cole, too. The documentation captures what was recorded. So the 94% figure represents Nathan Cole's documented attendance, not his actual attendance. Correct, she said, as does the 67%. Harrington sat down. He had not improved his position. Dr. Angela Torres had been Marcus's pediatrician since his 2nd month of life. She was warm and direct in the specific way of pediatricians who have been dealing with anxious parents for 20 years and have learned to be both comforting and honest simultaneously. She had produced a summary of Marcus's medical record, specifically the documentation of who had accompanied Marcus to his appointments. Over 9 years and 43 recorded appointments, Nathan Cole had accompanied Marcus to 34 of them. That was 79% of all recorded medical visits. Vanessa Cole had accompanied Marcus to 9 appointments, 21%. There had been 2 emergency department visits, one in 2018 for a broken finger, one in 2020 for a respiratory infection that had required monitoring overnight. Nathan Cole had been present for both. Dr. Torres noted this specifically without being asked. Harrington cross-examined Dr. Torres with the specific quality of someone who has realized that cross-examination is not going to improve his position and is trying to minimize damage rather than make progress. He asked whether Nathan Cole's presence at medical appointments was indicative of parenting quality or simply scheduling. I can speak to presence, Dr. Torres said. I can't speak to the difference between presence and quality. What I can say is that Marcus Cole has been a healthy, well-cared-for child across 9 years of my observation, and that his father has been present and engaged at the substantial majority of his medical interactions with my practice. Engaged how? Harrington asked. He knows Marcus's medical history. He asks specific questions. He remembers what we discussed at previous appointments. He follows through on the recommendations I make. She paused. These are the qualities of an involved parent. Harrington sat down. I was sitting at the table with Diane, and I was looking at my hands, the same hands that had tied Marcus's shoes on the first day of kindergarten, that had held a phone at 3 a.m. while a pediatric nurse gave instructions, that had spent 9 years writing in 12 notebooks before going to sleep. The numbers were not comfortable things to hear, not because they surprised me, but because hearing them spoken aloud in a courtroom by people who had no reason to advocate for me, and every professional reason to be accurate, produced the specific quality of a thing, becoming fully real, that had previously existed only as my own understanding of it. My presence in Marcus's life had not been a feeling or a memory or a version of events. It had been documented independently by the people who had been in the room with us. 94% of school events, 79% of medical appointments, 9 years, 3,287 entries. I had not built the record to produce these numbers. I had built the record because I did not want to be my father, and the record had become the proof of that. Part 12. The message that changed everything. Diane called me on a Wednesday evening, 2 days after the witness testimony. I need you to think again about Derek Walsh, she said. Not the affair itself. The specific part I need. The material interest, I said. Yes, A person is testifying by way of a written character reference to your fitness as a parent. That person is in a relationship with your wife, which gives him a direct personal and financial stake in the outcome of these proceedings. The court is entitled to know that when evaluating the weight of his testimony. And the message, I said. The message is relevant for a different reason. It's a statement made by Vanessa to Derek Walsh about your parenting. It predates the proceedings. It's relevant to the consistency of her position, whether the characterization she is now making of you in these proceedings is consistent with her private assessment of your parenting at the relevant time. I was quiet for a moment. What exactly do you need? I said. I need the screenshot of the specific message, she said. Just that. Not the relationship, not the broader context, the specific statement. And you'll disclose it to Harrington. It will be produced in supplemental discovery. Yes. I thought about Marcus, asleep in his bedroom down the hall. He was with me this week under the temporary arrangement. I thought about what he knew and didn't know, about what was happening, which was carefully managed to be as little as possible, which meant he understood that his parents were working something out without understanding the specifics of the working out. He was 9. He was not going to be 9 forever. At some point, he would be old enough to understand what had happened, and the record of what had happened would exist in one form or another. I thought about which version of the record I wanted him to have access to. The version in which his father had let a man who was in a relationship with his mother describe him as absent and emotionally unavailable without correcting the record, or the version in which his father had in the most limited and specific way possible corrected the record. I'll get you the screenshot, I said. I accessed the backup of Vanessa's phone, the cloud backup that was still associated with our joint account, which had not yet been separated, and I found the relevant message thread, and I found the specific message. Nathan is a great dad. That's the hardest part. I keep thinking if he was different, this would be easier. I sent the screenshot to Diane. The following morning, Harrington received the supplemental discovery. That evening, Diane sent me a text. Derek Walsh has withdrawn his character reference. Harrington's assistant confirmed by email. I read the text. I put the phone down. I went to check on Marcus, who was asleep with one arm hanging off the edge of the bed, in the specific unconscious way of children who manage to take up the maximum possible space while horizontal. I moved his arm back onto the mattress without waking him. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. I thought about the message about Vanessa sitting somewhere in a moment when the hardest thing was not what she was doing, but the person she was doing it, about writing a sentence that told the truth about something she was not otherwise telling the truth about. I thought about what it had cost her to write that sentence. I thought about the fact that she had written it, and that it had existed, and that I had found it not by looking for it, but by a sequence of ordinary events. I thought about the record, how it accumulates, how it doesn't disappear simply because no one is looking at it. Part 13. What Marcus said. The child advocate's report arrived on a Thursday. I did not see the full report. It was submitted directly to Judge Morales under seal for her consideration in the custody determination. What I saw was the summary that advocates are required to provide to both parties, a brief account of the methodology, the number of sessions, and the general findings. The advocate was a licensed clinical social worker named Dr. Pamela Hughes, who had been doing child advocacy work in the Cook County Family Court System for 14 years. She had met with Marcus 3 times over a period of 6 weeks, once at his school, once at the temporary home with me, and once at the family home with Vanessa. The summary described Marcus as a well-adjusted, age-appropriately verbal child with strong attachments to both parents. It noted that he demonstrated awareness of the family situation, consistent with what he would be expected to understand at his developmental stage, without evidence of coaching or undue influence from either parent. The summary then contained a paragraph that I have read many times since. When asked about significant memories and experiences involving each parent, the child demonstrated markedly different response patterns. Memories involving the mother tended to be described in general terms consistent with a secure and loving relationship. Memories involving the father were notably more specific, more detailed, and accompanied by greater affective richness. The child's responses indicated a deep and particularized knowledge of shared experiences, specific conversations, and moments of emotional significance. This pattern is consistent with a high degree of present, engaged, attuned parenting over an extended period. The child's most detailed and affect-rich responses concerned activities and events involving his father. Marcus had not been coached. He had not been asked to advocate for either parent. He had been asked to describe his experiences and what had come out naturally in the specific language of a 9-year-old who does not have the vocabulary to describe attachment theory, but who lives in the reality that attachment theory attempts to describe, was 9 years of an ordinary, unremarkable, completely specific kind of presence. The 20 minutes in the car after the soccer game, the night with the fever and the pediatric advice line, the song Nathan had sung at 2 a.m. when he had run out of things to say, the afternoon with the family photographs, and the question about the grandfather, and the answer that had produced from Marcus the most important thing Nathan had ever heard. The report did not quote Marcus directly. The report was a clinical document structured in the specific clinical language of child welfare assessment. But the things Marcus had described had enough specificity and affect that the advocate had found them notable. They were notable because they were in the journals. They were in the journals because I had written them down. I had written them down because my father had not been there to write anything, and I had needed to be different from my father, and the way I knew to be different was to be present, and to record the presence, and the record of the presence had become 9 years later the thing that a court-appointed advocate found when she asked my son about his father. The chain was complete. It had begun with a man who left. It ended with a child who remembered. End of Act 3. Act 4. Justice and Healing. Parts 14 to 15. 4,800 words. Runtime 30 minutes. Part 14. What the court decided. Judge Morales issued her ruling on a Friday afternoon in March. I was in the courtroom with Diane. Vanessa was across the room with Harrington. The room had the specific quality it always had worn: functional, neither harsh nor welcoming. And I sat in it with the quality of attention I had been bringing to everything in the preceding months, present, specific, not performing anything for anyone. The ruling was detailed. Judge Morales was not a judge who issued rulings that could be misunderstood, and she had written this one with the precision that the evidence deserved. She found that both parties were fit and caring parents. She was explicit about this, not as a diplomatic formality, but as a finding of fact. Vanessa Cole was a devoted mother who had been present and engaged in Marcus's life in ways that were genuine and documented. The contest was not about fitness. It was about the pattern of primary caregiving over 9 years and the arrangement that would best serve Marcus's stability going forward. She found on the evidence that Nathan Cole had been Marcus's primary caregiver for the substantial majority of Marcus's 9 years of life. She cited the journals. She cited Principal Webb's testimony. She cited Dr. Torres's records. She cited the child advocate's report. She noted that the consistency of the documentary record across multiple independent sources over an extended time period was unusual and was given significant weight. She found that stability for Marcus meant continuing in as close to the pattern that had actually existed as the circumstances of the separation permitted. She ordered joint legal custody, all significant decisions about Marcus's life to be made jointly by both parents. She ordered primary physical custody, with Nathan Cole Marcus's primary residence to be with his father. She ordered alternating weekends and 1 evening per week with Vanessa, with provisions for holidays and school breaks that gave both parents significant time. She noted in the ruling that the temporary arrangement during proceedings had shown no adverse impact on Marcus's functioning, and that this was consistent with the pattern of care she was making permanent. She noted Derek Walsh's character reference withdrawal and did not comment on it further. She signed the order. Harrington was speaking quietly to Vanessa. I could not hear what he was saying. I was not trying to hear. I was looking at the table in front of me. Diane put a hand briefly on my arm. "That's as good as it gets," she said quietly. "You understand that?" "I understand," I said. We left the courthouse. I sat in my truck in the parking structure on Clark Street for 20 minutes. I thought about the day Marcus was born. The way he had looked in the first hour, not the way babies look in photographs, which is the cleaned-up version, but the actual way, the specific quality of a person who has just arrived in the world and is still in the process of arriving. I thought about the rocking chair in the nursery, and the first notebook, and the first entry. April 17th, 2015. Marcus Raymond Cole. 6 pounds, 14 ounces. I picked up my phone. I called Ray. He answered on the second ring. "It's over," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "How did it go?" "Joint legal, primary physical with me." Another moment of quiet. Then, "Nathan." "Yeah. I'm proud of you," he said. "I didn't do anything but tell the truth." I said. "That's not nothing," he said. "A lot of people don't." I sat with that. "Ray," I said, "you said something a few months ago about me not winning, about me proving the truth. Two things being different." "I remember," he said. "What did you mean by that?" He was quiet for a moment. "I meant that winning is about what you get. Proving the truth is about what exists. You didn't get your marriage back. You didn't get the family you wanted. What you got is a court order that accurately describes the reality of how you've been Marcus's father, and Marcus growing up in the house of a man whose record speaks for him." A pause. "That's not winning. That's better than winning." I started the truck. "Come over tonight," I said. "I'll make dinner." "I'll be there at 6, he said. Part 15. What Nathan knows now. I want to tell you what I know now, not as a list of lessons, because lessons make experience sound more organized than it actually is, but as the things that are true and that I understand differently than I did before all of this. The first thing is about my father. I spent 30 years understanding his absence as a failure, which it was, and I am not going to soften that characterization. He failed, he left, and his leaving cost my mother and my brother and me real things that cannot be recovered. That is accurate, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But I have also come to understand his absence as the gift it accidentally was. Not the gift of his actual absence that was not a gift. The gift of the negative space, the specific clear picture of what not to do, available to me from the age of 7, that shaped everything I would later do. The hunger it created in me to be different, the specific daily, ordinary kind of different that does not announce itself, that shows up in the record only when someone looks for it, that consists of nothing more dramatic than being there and writing it down. My father gave me a hole. I filled the hole with 12 notebooks. The notebooks built the case that gave me my son. That is not a comfortable chain of causation. It is also the true one. The second thing is about the journals. I am asked when people know about them whether I kept them as a strategy, whether I was protecting myself, whether I had some intuition from the beginning that I would eventually need what I was building. The honest answer is no. I kept the journals because my father's absence had left no record, and the absence of a record had allowed his story to be told by the people who told it, rather than by the evidence of what had actually occurred. I kept the journals because I wanted Marcus to have access to the accurate account of his own childhood, to be able to look up, if he ever needed to, what had actually happened, who had actually been there, what had actually been said. I kept the journals for Marcus, not for court. The court found them useful because they were accurate. They were accurate because they were not built to be useful to a court. This is the distinction that I think matters. Most documentation that is built to be useful to a dispute is documentation that has been shaped by the dispute. Documentation that predates the dispute is documentation that has been shaped only by the reality it was recording. 3,287 entries in 12 handwritten notebooks across 9 years, none of them written with any knowledge that they would ever be read by anyone but me, and possibly Marcus when he was old enough to want to read them. That is what the journals were. That is why they held. The third thing is about Vanessa. I have said elsewhere in this account that I do not hate her, and I want to be precise about what that means and what it does not mean. It does not mean that what she did was acceptable, or that the pain of it was not real, or that the 12 years of marriage and the family we built together, and the specific irretrievable loss of the life I had thought we were building, it does not mean that any of that was fine. It means that I understand what she did without excusing it, which is a different and harder thing than either condemning it or forgiving it. I believe Vanessa loved Marcus genuinely completely, and that her love for him was not reduced or complicated by what she did in our marriage. I believe she was a good mother in the specific and real ways that she was a good mother. I believe the characterization of her as Marcus's consistent emotional anchor, which Harrington deployed and Derek Walsh's letter amplified, was not entirely false. It was the same selective truth that the characterization of me as absent and unavailable was true in certain registers, false in others, incomplete as a full account. The message she had written to Derek Walsh, Nathan, is a great dad. That's the hardest part, tells me that she knew the fuller picture, even when she was not presenting it. She knew it. She said it to him in the specific private register of honesty that is available between people who are close and who are not in that moment managing the impression of an audience. She did not present it in the proceeding, but she knew it. And the fact that she knew it means that what she did to me in the proceedings was not the product of delusion or self-deception. It was the product of the specific calculation that people sometimes make when they are in competition for something. They want the calculation that the most useful version of a story, even when you know it is not the full version, is the one that advances your position. She made that calculation. I understand it. I do not excuse it. I am not angry at it in the way I was in the months when I was closest to it. I am mostly just sad that she felt she needed to. The fourth thing is about Marcus. He is 9 years old, and he sleeps with one arm hanging off the bed, and he asks me most evenings questions about how things work, mechanical things, usually because he has been watching me work since he was old enough to come on job sites, and he has absorbed the specific curiosity about systems and function that comes from watching someone who works with their hands. He asks about furnaces and pipes and electrical circuits and why buildings stay up. I tell him what I know. When I don't know, I tell him that too, and we look it up together. He does not ask about the court case. He knows his parents live in 2 houses now, and he knows he spends more time in mine, and he has the resilience of children who are secure in the specific ways that matter, and who do not require every circumstance to be ideal in order to function. He is okay. I need to say that simply and clearly, because the point of all of it, the journals, the testimony, the screenshots, the proceedings, the ruling, the point was always only that he should be okay. He is. The fifth thing, the last thing, is about what my father left me. He left me a question. A large, unanswerable, perpetually present question. Where was he? Why wasn't he there? What was the thing that was more important than being present? I could not answer the question. Nobody could. He died in 2021 in Cleveland of a cardiac event, and I did not go to the funeral because I had not had a relationship with him for 15 years, and going would have been a performance I could not honestly produce. Ray went. Ray has always been the one of us who could find grace in the places I could not find it, and I am grateful to him for that, without being able to replicate it. But the question is answered now in a different way than I expected. My father left me a question by not being there, and I answered it by being there. And the answer is in 12 notebooks, in a canvas bag, in the closet of my apartment in Bridgeport, and it is 3,287 pages long, and every page is in my handwriting, and every entry is true. Marcus will be old enough to read them someday. I will give them to him. I will tell him this is where your father was, every single day. This is where I was.